Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our cozy little corner of the countryside. Today's story takes us into a cold morning where the mist lingers low and the first breaths of winter wrap around a small wooden house. Yet inside, there's a different kind of warmth, the warmth of family. As the sweet smell of roasted sweet potatoes fills the air, little Maya's laughter echoes, and Uncle Day prepares to take her to school. But tell me, what truly keeps us warm in winter? Is it the fire in the stove, or the love that quietly burns within a home? The morning began softly. A pale light spread across the small wooden house as thin smoke drifted from the kitchen stove. Huyen called out from inside, her voice gentle yet firm. "Maya, invite Uncle Day for breakfast before you go to school." The air was crisp, the kind that bites a little at your cheeks, yet the sound of her voice made everything feel warmer. Dee entered the house, brushing off the chill from outside. "Let's have breakfast together, everyone," he said with a quiet smile. The aroma of roasted sweet potatoes filled the room. Humble, earthy, sweet. Huyen smiled. "Today we'll have sweet potatoes." Maya giggled. "I only like the yellow ones, Mom." The little girl's laughter bounced off the wooden walls like sunlight in winter. Moments like this were simple, almost ordinary. Yet they carried the quiet rhythm of life that made the house feel alive. Dee, still a little awkward, sat down beside Maya. "Here, let Uncle peel this one for you." His hands, rough from work, moved with care. "The temperature dropped today," Huyen reminded. "Remember to wear a warm jacket." "Yes," he replied softly, glancing at Maya. "You too, little one. It's colder than yesterday." Outside, the wind stirred through the bamboo fence, whispering of the season's change. Inside, the family gathered closer. 3 people connected by small gestures, by shared mornings like this. They talked about the garden. The heavy rain had flooded the old vegetable beds, and Huyen had spent days replanting new seedlings. Day looked at her hands, calloused, with bits of soil still clinging to her skin. "You should have waited for me," he said gently. "These are heavy jobs." Huyen smiled, shaking her head. "You work harder than I do. I'm planting vegetables to sell at the market for Tet." That's how she was, steady, kind, and resilient. She didn't complain about the cold or the work or the smallness of their life. She simply tended to it, one seed, one plant, one meal at a time. As they ate, Maya leaned against her mother's shoulder, her eyes bright and curious. Day watched them, the scene so ordinary, yet so full of meaning. In a world that often rushes past, this home seemed to breathe slowly, peacefully. "After breakfast," Day said, "I'll take Maya to school and stop by the lumber yard to buy more wood. I'll finish the wall today. Once it's done, the room will be warmer." Huyen hesitated. "You just got your motorbike back. Don't spend too much. I still have some money left." He smiled faintly. "That's all right. If we put what we have together, it should be enough." The conversation was simple, yet in every word there was care. A shared understanding between 2 people who had learned the value of quiet support. The little family finished their meal, laughter blending with the crackling sound of firewood. When it was time to go, Maya hugged her mother tightly. "Goodbye, Mom," she said, her voice cheerful, unaware of the cold. "Study well, dear," Huyen replied, helping her into a small pink jacket. Day took Maya's school bag. "Let's go, little one." The 2 stepped outside into the fog. It was almost 7, but the sky still hung gray, as if dawn itself was reluctant to rise. From the doorway, Huyen watched them disappear down the small dirt path, the sound of the motorbike fading into the distance. She turned back inside, to the warmth of the half-finished wooden wall. the scent of smoke, the soft breathing of a cat named Bibi curled near the fire. The day had only begun, and though the wind outside was cold, the heart of the house remained warm, pulsing quietly with love, work, and care. Because warmth, she thought, isn't only about fire or blankets. It's the way someone hands you a peeled sweet potato. It's the voice that tells you to wear a coat. It's the promise that tomorrow they'll still be there beside you, no matter how cold it gets outside. By the time Day and Maya returned from school, the sunlight had softened into a thin golden haze. The air still carried a chill, but the garden looked lively. Neat rows of soil freshly tilled, the faint scent of earth rising like a quiet promise. Huyen was crouched near the beds, her hands deep in the soil, loosening clumps and pulling out weeds. Beside her, Bibi, the small gray cat, watched every move, its tail curling lazily. Day parked the motorbike near the fence, carrying a few bundles of wood on his shoulder. "I got the lumber," he called out. "Let's finish the wall before evening." Huyen straightened up, brushing the dirt from her palms. "You must be tired," she said. "At least drink some water before starting." He smiled, shaking his head. "I'll rest after it's done. The wind's too cold to leave that wall open another night." Together they began working, the sound of saws and hammers blending with the rhythm of the afternoon. Each strike echoed softly across the quiet valley. The unfinished wall, once just planks leaning against the frame, slowly took shape. Huyen held the boards steady, while Day nailed them in place. Occasionally their hands brushed, and both smiled without a word. It wasn't just carpentry, it was connection. Every board they placed was a small act of care, every nail a piece of shared determination to make their home warmer, safer, more whole. As the wall rose, sunlight spilled through the gaps, casting strips of gold across the floor. Dust danced in the light. It was beautiful in its simplicity, the kind of beauty you don't notice until you stop to breathe. "Should we leave a small window here?" Day asked. "Yes," Huyen nodded. "The light from the garden will make the room feel brighter." He paused for a moment, looking at her face in that same golden light. "You're right," he said quietly. Later, as dusk approached, Huyen spread rice husks over the garden beds. "It'll keep the soil warm and dry before the rain comes," she explained. Day helped her carry the heavy sack, the two moving in silent rhythm. It was teamwork born not of instruction, but of shared life, the kind where each knows what the other needs before being told. While they worked, Maya's laughter echoed from the small front yard. She was playing with Bibi, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Mom, Uncle D!" she shouted. "Look, Bibi is hiding under the basket again." They both looked up, smiling. The simple sound of that laughter filled the space between them with something wordless and deep. When the last board was nailed and the garden covered, night had fully arrived. The air was sharper now, the first real cold of winter settling in. From inside the house, the faint orange glow of the stove flickered through the new wooden wall, no longer broken, no longer letting the wind in. "Done," Dee said, exhaling heavily, his breath visible in the cold. "It's not perfect, but it'll keep the chill away." "It's more than perfect," Huyen replied, her eyes reflecting the soft firelight. "Thank you." He looked around the small house, the scent of wood, the quiet hum of a kettle on the stove, the distant chirping of crickets, and felt something he hadn't known for a long time: belonging. Inside, Huyen ladled soup into bowls, the steam rising in gentle swirls. Maya crawled into her lap, half asleep, mumbling about her day. Day sat nearby, silent, listening, to the warmth, to the peace, to the sound of family breathing in unison. He realized that sometimes the world doesn't shout its miracles. Sometimes it just hands them to you, in the form of a warm meal, a sturdy wall, and the quiet laughter of those who make a cold night feel like home. The next morning came wrapped in mist. The cold was sharper now, nipping at fingers and toes, but the little wooden house seemed alive with quiet energy. Inside, the new wall stood firm, sealing out the wind, keeping warmth in. The faint scent of resin and sawdust mixed with the smell of sweet potatoes roasting over the fire. Huyen crouched near the stove, turning the potatoes carefully. "These will taste best with a bit of salt," she murmured. Maya sat beside her, chin resting on her knees, eyes following every move. "Mom," she said softly, "can we eat them by the fire, like last night?" Huyen smiled. "Of course, my little one." Outside, Day stacked the leftover lumber neatly under the porch roof. His breath formed small clouds in the frosty air. The chickens clucked and scratched the yard, happily pecking at bits of rice husk scattered around. Even the cat seemed lazier than usual, curled up near the wall as if it knew how much warmer the house had become. When Day came in, Huyen handed him a steaming cup of ginger tea. "You've been working non-stop," she said. "At least rest a bit." He sat down near the stove, the wooden chair creaking softly. The warmth seeped into his hands, into his bones. "Feels good," he whispered. "It's only been a day, but the house already feels different." "Because it's complete now," Huyen replied, glancing around the room. "Every board, every nail, every corner, it all holds the warmth we built together." They shared a quiet look. Outside, the wind howled faintly through the trees, but it could no longer reach them. Later, Dee helped Huyen prepare lunch. Their movements were simple but in harmony, the rhythm of two people who had slowly learned each other's pace. When the food was ready, they sat around the low wooden table. Maya, her cheeks pink from the cold, nibbled on her sweet potato and grinned. "Uncle Day, this one tastes better than the yellow one." He laughed. "Maybe because you roasted it with love." That laughter, clear, light, full of life, filled every corner of the little house. The afternoon passed in a soft rhythm. Day went outside to chop some firewood, while Huyen tended the garden. The sky stayed gray, but their hearts seemed bright. Each strike of Dee's axe echoed like a heartbeat. Each handful of soil Huyen turned was a gesture of care. When the work was done, they sat by the doorway, watching the mist fade into the hills. Huyen rested her hands on her lap, sighing contentedly. "It's strange," she said, "how even the cold feels gentle when we have something to do together." Day nodded, his gaze distant but peaceful. "Warmth doesn't come from the fire," he said softly. "It comes from moments like this." Twilight settled over the countryside, turning the sky lavender. Maya fell asleep in Huyen's arms, her small breaths even and calm. The cat purred near the stove. The air smelled of smoke, wood, and something deeper, the scent of belonging. Day threw another log onto the fire, watching the sparks rise. "Tomorrow, I'll fix the stove higher," he said. "You shouldn't have to bend so low when cooking." Huyen smiled faintly, not answering. Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. For a long while, they didn't speak. The only sounds were the soft crackling of wood and the rhythmic breathing of a house that finally felt whole. In that silence, something unspoken bloomed. Not passion, not confession, but trust. The kind of trust that grows slowly, like a seed taking root beneath winter soil, waiting for spring to come. And though the world outside was still cold, inside that small wooden house, warmth was not just something they felt, it was something they had built together. As night deepened, the house glowed softly beneath the flicker of the oil lamp. Outside, frost crept along the window edges, turning the glass pale white. But inside, everything shimmered in amber light. Day sat near the fire, turning an ear of corn over the embers, while Huyen mended Maya's small jacket. Every so often she glanced up, smiling quietly, a smile that said more than words ever could. When the corn finished roasting, Day handed her one. "Try this," he said. "It's perfectly golden." She took a bite, laughed softly. "It's delicious, and too hot," she said, waving her hand as the steam rose. Maya, still drowsy, giggled at their exchange, her eyes glinting with the sleepy joy of a child who feels safe. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, but the sound was distant now, like a story from another world. In here, time seemed to slow down. The crackle of fire, the scent of roasted corn, the low hum of conversation, all of it formed a lullaby for the night. Day looked at the wall they had built that morning. "It's strange," he murmured, "how something as simple as wood can hold so much of our effort, and somehow, our warmth too." Huyen nodded. "That's what a home is, isn't it? Pieces of life, fitted together with care." He smiled faintly. "And patience." They fell silent again, each lost in thought. The fire burned low, but its light still danced across their faces, soft, forgiving, alive. For a brief moment, Day's gaze lingered on Huyen and Maya, the woman stirring the coals, the child sleeping with her head in her mother's lap. It was then he realized, warmth isn't about temperature. It's about presence, the nearness of people who make you feel that no matter how cold the world gets, you'll never face it alone. He took a deep breath, feeling the peace of the moment sink into him, like the quiet hum of the hearth. Outside, the wind sighed. Inside, the small wooden house exhaled warmth, the kind built not from fire, but from love. And perhaps that's what the next chapter will bring. Not a story of grand events, but of ordinary days where love is quietly built, one board, one seed, one smile at a time. Because sometimes, the simplest warmth lasts the longest.